Those witnesses are reliable, and that information has been provided to authorities. That's what attorney Edward Paltzik said, on the record, about two members of the Ocean Springs community who claim they saw 18-year-old Nolan Wells alive on Horn Island at 5:50 p.m. on July 4th. Here's the problem. According to GPS records from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the boat Wells traveled to that island on, the Triton, left the dock at 4:31 p.m. Without him, two claims, two clocks, both on the record, both can't be true. That's not a rumor. That's not speculation. That's a documented GPS timestamped departure, set against a named attorney's claim that his witnesses saw Nolan Wells alive more than an hour after that boat was gone. We're going to hold both of those in our heads for the next few minutes, because neither one is going away. But before we get to the timeline, I need to tell you something else, something that hasn't been resolved and that changes the weight of everything you're about to hear. An independent autopsy, conducted by forensic pathologist Dr. Roger A. Mitchell Jr. and commissioned by the Wells family, found a 12 by 8-inch area of red discoloration on the back of Nolan Wells's skull. The cause of that discoloration has not been determined. The report states plainly that non-accidental factors could not be ruled out, not confirmed, not explained, just there. On a report from a licensed forensic pathologist, sitting alongside a state autopsy that lists the cause and manner of death as undetermined, with the full findings and toxicology still sealed, pending grand jury review. An 18-year-old college football player went to a barrier island for the 4th of July. 2 days later, a National Park Service ranger found his body on the shoreline, and nearly 2 months in, we still don't know exactly when he was last alive, who he was with, or what left that mark on the back of his head. This is the case of Nolan Wells. And today, we're going to walk through what's confirmed, what's claimed, and what's still just theory, starting with the hour everyone thought was already accounted for. I just want to know what happened to my son. That's Christine Wansley, Nolan Wells' mother. Nearly 2 months since she said those words. That question still doesn't have an answer. So let's build the timeline from the ground up, with names, timestamps, and sources, because that's the only way to understand exactly where it breaks. On the evening of July 3rd, 2026, Nolan Wells told his parents he'd be spending the 4th of July weekend with friends. He left home that night. The next morning, he traveled by boat to Horn Island, a remote, federally protected barrier island roughly 5 miles off the Mississippi Gulf Coast, to join a large holiday gathering, reportedly around 30 people, many of them former classmates from Ocean Springs. Here's what's documented. GPS records from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources indicate the boat Wells traveled on, identified in reporting as the Triton, departed a private dock at approximately 9:56 a.m., arrived at Horn Island at 11:14 a.m., and left the island at 4:31 p.m. It returned to the mainland dock at 5:44 p.m. Nolan Wells was not on board when it returned. 2 days later, on July 6th, a National Park Service ranger discovered his body on the Horn Island shoreline. He was identified through dental records. Since then, 2 separate autopsies, the state's and an independent one, commissioned by the family and performed by forensic pathologist Dr. Roger A. Mitchell Jr., have both listed the cause and manner of death as undetermined. The state's full report and toxicology results remain sealed, pending grand jury review. Now here's the fault line. Nothing on record confirms what Nolan Wells did or who he was with between the Triton's 4:31 p.m. departure and any point after. That gap is not a rumor someone invented. It's the actual space between a GPS timestamp and everything that came next. And right now, no document, no official statement, and no named witness has closed it. That gap is exactly where our cold open contradiction lives. Source 1, MDMR's GPS data, placing the boat's departure at 4:31 p.m., a government record, not a claim. Source 2, attorney Edward Paltzik, representing 3 of Wells's friends, who says 2 members of the Ocean Springs community reported seeing Wells alive on the island at approximately 5:50 p.m. That's not a witness statement released by law enforcement. It's an account relayed by an attorney on his client's behalf. Both sources are named. Neither has been reconciled with the other. Before we go further into that gap, it's worth remembering who we're talking about. Nolan Wells was 18 years old, a freshman wide receiver at Southwest Mississippi Community College. From Ocean Springs, Mississippi, teammates have described him as someone who showed up early, worked hard, and was well-liked in a locker room that isn't easy to break into as a freshman. He was one of roughly 30 people on that island that day, and somewhere in the hours after his friend's boat pulled away, he became the only one whose next move nobody can document. That's where we go next. Get on the boat, Nolan. Get on the boat. That's how Warren Hudson has described the moment his group tried to get Nolan Wells to leave Horn Island with them. Repeating the request, he says, more than once as their boat started taking on water. If that account is accurate, Nolan Wells heard those words and chose to stay. But there's another account that says something very different happened, and right now both versions are on the record. Let's start with what the friends who left on the boat are saying. Warren Hudson and Jax Pitalo, two of the three friends now represented by attorneys Edward Paltzik and Tyler Cox, have stated that Wells chose to remain on the island with a young woman publicly referred to in reporting as Katie, and that he planned to catch a later boat back. They say they asked him multiple times to come with them as their boat began taking on water because of a bilge pump failure. Now here's the other side of that same moment. Attorney Ben Crump has said the young woman told investigators that Wells told her he was going back to get on the boat with his friends. Sit with that for a second. Two accounts, same afternoon, same island, same boat. One says Nolan stayed by choice. The other says Nolan intended to leave and didn't make it. Civil rights attorney Ben Crump, representing the Wells family, has publicly described this as a core contradiction in the case. He's not wrong. These two versions cannot both be fully accurate, and as of this reporting, nothing on the record reconciles them. While that contradiction sits unresolved, here's something that is fully documented. Audio of the distress call, obtained and reported by CNN and NBC, confirms that an emergency towing call was placed regarding a boat taking on water near Horn Island that afternoon. That's not a claim from a friend, an attorney, or a family member. That's recorded audio verified by two major news organizations. The mechanical failure Hudson and Pitalo describe, the reason their boat was in distress, has real evidentiary support. But here's what that audio doesn't do. It doesn't tell us where Nolan Wells was standing when that call was made. It doesn't tell us whether he heard it. It doesn't tell us whether Katie was still with him or whether he was already walking toward the water to try to catch up. The distress call confirms the boat was sinking. It does not confirm what Nolan Wells did next. So here's where that leaves us. We have a documented mechanical failure. We have two friends saying Wells chose to stay behind. We have an attorney relaying that the young woman he stayed with told investigators he intended to leave. And we have no independent, named witness, no one outside these two competing accounts, who has said on the record which version is true. That's not a gap anyone invented for this video. It's the actual distance between he chose to stay and he was trying to get back to the boat, two accounts that split at the exact moment that matters most. And that split doesn't end with Katie, because there's another piece of audio from that same afternoon, a video, not a phone call, and it's about to complicate this timeline even further. I would be stepping outside the bounds of the law. That's District Attorney Angel Myers McIllerath, explaining on the record on August 18th exactly why she won't tell the public what her office actually knows about the death of Nolan Wells. Not silence, not stonewalling, an actual legal boundary, stated in her own words. And that single sentence tells you more about where this case stands right now than almost anything else we've covered. So let's put the confirmed chronology back on the table one more time before we go further. July 3rd, Nolan Wells tells his parents he's spending the holiday weekend with friends and leaves home that night. July 4th, he travels to Horn Island. GPS records from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources place the boat's departure from the island at 4:31 p.m. without him aboard. July 6th, a National Park Service ranger finds his body on the shoreline. Since then, two autopsies, the state's and an independent one by Dr. Roger A. Mitchell Jr., both list cause and manner of death as undetermined. That's the confirmed skeleton of this case. Everything else, the Katie account, Crump's contradiction, the distress call, sits inside that skeleton, unresolved. Now here's where the institution enters the story. District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath said on August 18th that she has vowed to forward the results of the law enforcement investigation to a grand jury, to let that body decide whether any charges are warranted. And when asked to share more publicly before that happens, she said she'd be stepping outside the bounds of the law to do so. That matters, and here's why. In a case like this, silence from officials usually gets read one of two ways. Either they're hiding something, or they're following procedure. McElrath didn't leave that up to interpretation. She named the reason. She's bound by law, in her account, from discussing an active investigation ahead of a grand jury. That's a documented response, not an absence of one. It doesn't resolve the case. It does tell you the case hasn't stalled. It's moving toward a specific legal mechanism, on a timeline the DA's office controls, not the public. That's the rehook. Because everything we've covered so far, the departure time, the Katie contradiction, the distress call, all of it is heading somewhere. A grand jury. A body of ordinary citizens who will eventually look at the completed state autopsy, the toxicology results, and whatever else investigators have gathered, and decide whether this was an accident, a tragedy with no crime attached, or something that warrants charges. We don't know when that presentation happens. We don't know what evidence will be in the room. What we do know is that the DA's office has said, in a named, dated, on-record statement, that this case is actively being prepared for exactly that step. So here's where that leaves the timeline. A confirmed departure at 4:31 p.m., a disputed account of what happened after. A distress call that confirms mechanical failure, but not much else. And now, an institution telling us, plainly, that answers are coming, just not yet. And not from her, not before a grand jury sees this first. Which means the next real test of this case isn't going to happen in a news conference. One behind closed doors, with a jury we'll never see and evidence we haven't been shown. Before we get there, though, there's one more account we need to sit with, because not everyone close to this case agrees that the friends who left that boat did anything wrong at all. These are completely innocent young men. That's how attorneys representing Warren Hudson, Jax Patalo, and Morgan Seymour have described their clients. Three friends who left Horn Island without Nolan Wells, and who have spent the past several weeks watching public suspicion build around exactly that fact. Before we go any further, we owe it to this case to sit with their side of it directly. I want to be fair to the other side of this for a second, because it's easy, in a case like this, to let a departure time become an accusation. Attorneys Edward Paltzik and Tyler Cox have stated on the record that their clients did nothing wrong that day, that they left Horn Island because their boat was taking on water, not because they were abandoning their friend. That account isn't just an assertion. It's corroborated by the distress call audio obtained by CNN and NBC, confirming that an emergency towing call was placed regarding that exact mechanical failure. A sinking boat is not something three teenagers invented after the fact to explain their departure. It's on tape. Their account, as relayed through their attorneys, is straightforward. They asked Nolan Wells to get on the boat. He chose to stay with a young woman on the island instead. They didn't abandon him, the water was rising, and they left when they had to. Whether or not you find that account fully satisfying, it is a real, named, attorney-relayed position, and it deserves to be treated as exactly that, a serious account, not dismissed simply because it's convenient for the people giving it. Here's where I have to be precise about something, though, because this is exactly the kind of gap that gets papered over in true crime coverage, and I'm not going to do that here. A bilge pump failure on a boat carrying that many passengers in open water off a barrier island is the kind of detail that sounds like it should have an expert weighing in, someone who could speak to how quickly a boat like that takes on water, how much time a genuine mechanical failure like this would actually give a group to make decisions, whether the response described by Hudson and Patalo is consistent with a real emergency or something that unfolded differently than described. As of this reporting, no independent maritime safety expert has gone on the record specifically about the Triton's reported bilge pump failure, not because one has been asked and declined, not because one has been asked and stayed silent, simply because, publicly, that expert voice doesn't exist yet in this case. That's not a small omission. It's the difference between the boat was sinking, corroborated by audio, and the boat was sinking in a way a qualified expert has verified was consistent with the friend's account. We only have the first one right now. So here's where the counterweight actually lands. The friend's attorneys have a real, documented, audio corroborated account. That account has not been contradicted by any named source, but it also hasn't been independently verified by anyone with the technical expertise to confirm the specifics, the timing, the severity, the decision-making window a failure like that would actually create. That's not proof anyone is lying. It's simply an evidentiary gap that exists, named plainly, instead of quietly filled in with narration that sounds more certain than the facts allow. Which brings us back to that video, the one with the disputed voice on it. Because if there's one place in this case where he said, turns into something with actual footage attached, it's there. And that's exactly where we're headed next. Give me my freaking phone, what are you freaking doing? That's the line at the center of a video that's been watched, dissected, and argued over by millions of people trying to figure out one thing. Is that Nolan Wells' voice? Attorney Ben Crump publicly discussed this video, stating that a voice on it can be heard saying words to that effect, and suggested it involved Wells. That single suggestion is a large part of why this footage went viral in the first place. But here's the account that directly challenges it. Tresiston Shepard, a friend who was present that day, told Rolling Stone and ABC News that the voice is his, not Nolan Wells's. Shepard says he was in the water, arguing with his girlfriend, when a verbal and then physical altercation broke out with another young man, an acquaintance from outside their group. He says his uncle ordered him onto a boat, and that's when he can be heard yelling to be let off, because he wanted to keep confronting the other man. Shepard states plainly, Wells is not in that video and was not involved in that altercation. That's not just Shepard's word alone. His account is corroborated by his girlfriend, his uncle, and a family friend who is visible in the video, 3 named, defined witnesses, all giving on-record interviews to Rolling Stone and ABC News, all describing the same version of events. Now here's the account that pulls in the other direction. Javon Williams, another friend who was there, has said the voice does not sound like Wells to him, but that it matches a different friend entirely, someone he describes as having become very hostile that day. So we have Shepard, corroborated by 3 people, saying it's him. We have Williams saying it's someone else, not naming Wells, but not confirming Shepard's version either. Sheriff's investigators have confirmed the video is being considered as part of the investigation. No official determination identifying the speaker has been released. That's not a small detail sitting on the sidelines. It's a second independent evidence thread, separate from the Katie contradiction, and it hasn't been resolved by the one thing that actually could resolve it, an official identification. Until that happens, this video is exactly what the Ledger will eventually call it, a claim, not a confirmed fact, no matter how many times it's been played. Those witnesses are reliable. Hold on to that sentence, because it's about to sit directly across from a government record, and neither one has moved. We've now covered the Katie contradiction, the distress call, and the disputed video. But underneath all of it, one split has never actually closed. Let's put it back on the table, exactly as it was first presented, because that's the only fair way to look at it. According to GPS records from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, which we laid out back in Chapter 2, the boat Wells traveled on, the Triton, left Horn Island at 4:31 p.m. That's not a memory, not an impression. It's a time-stamped government record. Also from Chapter 2, attorney Edward Paltzik, representing 3 of Wells's friends, said 2 members of the Ocean Springs community have come forward saying they saw Nolan Wells alive on the island at approximately 5:50 p.m., roughly 80 minutes after that boat was already gone. That's it. That's the whole twist. There are 2 documented timelines running through this case, not one, and we haven't manufactured a new revelation to get here. We're re-anchoring the exact same 2 sources we opened this video with. Here's why that matters more now than it did in Chapter 1. Back then, it was a contradiction sitting cold, with no context behind it. Now it's sitting on top of everything else we know. It's sitting on top of a friend group split over who stayed and why. It's sitting on top of a video whose speaker still hasn't been identified. It's sitting on top of a district attorney who's told us, on the record, that she's bound by law from saying more before a grand jury sees this case. So I want you to hold two things in your head at the same time. One, a GPS record says the boat left at 4:31 p.m. without Nolan Wells. Two, an attorney says two community witnesses place him alive at 5:50 p.m. Neither source has been discredited. Neither has been independently confirmed against the other. As of this reporting, investigators have not said which timeline they believe or whether they believe both are somehow true. That's not a resolution. It's not supposed to be. It's the exact shape of the gap this entire case has been circling since the beginning, just clearer now than it was when we first laid it down. And that gap is about to run straight into the people whose job it is to close it. No agency has confirmed the vessel identity. That one sentence is the difference between a lead and a fact. And right now, more of this case sits on the lead side of that line than most viewers realize. Let's separate the two, cleanly, because that's the only way to see this case for what it actually is. Let's be precise about what's actually confirmed here, what's still just a claim, and what's pure theory. Start with confirmed involvement. Agencies whose role in this case is documented. On the record, no dispute. The Mississippi Department of Marine Resources provided the GPS data establishing the Triton's 4:31 p.m. departure. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office has said the viral video is being considered as part of its investigation, and District Attorney Angel Myers-McElrath's office is actively preparing the completed state autopsy and other evidence for grand jury review. 3 named agencies, 3 documented roles, none of that is in dispute. Now here's the other side, reported but unconfirmed. The 2 community witnesses, who attorney Edward Paltzik says place Nolan Wells on the island at 5:50 p.m., have not been named publicly, and law enforcement has not confirmed that account or attached it to the official investigation in any release statement. That claim currently exists at exactly one level, an attorney relaying it. Nothing more, nothing less. And then there's the Mac Daddy. A boat by that name appears in separate footage from Horn Island that day, and some of that footage appears to show a young man in swim trunks resembling those Wells wore. But no agency has confirmed the vessel identity. Not MDMR, not the Sheriff's Office, not anyone with the authority to make that call. It's a lead being discussed publicly. It is not, as of this reporting, an official piece of this case. Here's why that split matters more than it might seem. It's tempting, in a case like this, to let every rumor, every video, every attorney's claim collapse into one widening circle of involvement. That's how cases get bigger than the evidence actually supports. 3 agencies, documented roles, no dispute. 2 witnesses and 1 boat, discussed everywhere, confirmed by no one. Both categories are part of this story. Only one of them is part of the official record. And the family waiting for answers deserves to know exactly which is which. I just want to know what happened to my son. Christine Wansley has said those words more than once now. And underneath every timeline, every attorney statement, every disputed video we've walked through, that's the sentence this entire case actually comes back to. For a moment, set aside the GPS records and the grand jury and the confirmed versus unconfirmed splits. Nolan Wells was 18 years old, a freshman wide receiver at Southwest Mississippi Community College, months into a college career he'd worked to earn. From Ocean Springs, Mississippi, a place where, by every account, people knew his name before this case ever made national news. He left home on the night of July 3rd, telling his parents he'd be spending the holiday with friends. He was found 2 days later, still in the swim trunks he'd been photographed wearing earlier that same July 4th afternoon. There's something particularly hard to sit with in that detail. Not a piece of evidence, not a timestamp, just the trunks. The same ones from the pictures, from a day that was supposed to be an ordinary holiday with people he'd known most of his life. And while his family waits, the process around his death keeps moving, piece by piece, on its own schedule. Right now, a state autopsy is headed to a grand jury, a family-commissioned autopsy sits unreconciled with it, and Nolan Wells's phone has still not been through a completed, agreed-upon forensic exam. Say that back to yourself slowly, because it's not one thing. It's 3, all pending, all at once, all unresolved as this family tries to bury their son and understand what happened to him in the same breath. Two autopsies that don't agree on much beyond "we don't know." A phone that could hold answers, sitting in a dispute over who examines it and how, and a grand jury somewhere ahead that hasn't convened yet. That's not a narrative device. That's just what's actually happening, right now, in parallel. The paperwork of an investigation and the grief of a family, running on top of each other, refusing to separate cleanly the way they might in a case with faster answers. Christine Wansley isn't asking for a timeline breakdown or a grand jury procedure explainer. She's asking what happened to her son. Nearly 2 months later, nobody, not the friends, not the attorneys, not the DA's office, has been able to fully answer that. Let's be precise about what's actually confirmed here, what's still just a claim, and what's pure theory. That sentence is the entire reason this chapter exists. We've covered a lot of ground: a viral video, a distress call, 2 autopsies, an attorney's witness claims, a boat nobody's confirmed. Before we go any further, here's the full audit, laid out plainly, source by source. Confirmed GPS departure and arrival timestamps, released by the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, placing the Triton's departure from Horn Island at 4:31 p.m. Confirmed an independent autopsy finding of undetermined cause and manner of death, per the report from forensic pathologist Dr. Roger A. Mitchell Jr. Confirmed distress call audio, obtained and reported by CNN and NBC, documenting a genuine mechanical emergency on the boat that afternoon. Those 3 items aren't in dispute. They're documented, sourced, and attributable to a named agency, a named forensic pathologist, and 2 named news organizations that obtained the actual audio. Now the claims, real, on record, but not yet independently verified. Claim: 2 witnesses saw Nolan Wells on the island at approximately 5:50 p.m., according to attorney Edward Paltzik. Not independently confirmed by law enforcement, not named publicly. Claim: the boat seen in separate footage, named Mac Daddy, is the same vessel connected to Wells's group, according to TMZ's comparison of 2 videos. Unconfirmed by any agency. Claim: the voice in the viral video belongs to Trayston Shepard, according to Shepard himself and 3 corroborating named individuals. Not officially adjudicated by the sheriff's office. That's one account corroborated by 3 people, but it isn't the only one. Javon Williams has said the voice sounds like someone else entirely. Both remain claims until an official identification exists. And then, theory, not evidence. Not even a formal claim from a named source. Just theory, any narrative connecting the altercation in that video to what ultimately happened to Nolan Wells. As of this reporting, no named source, not Crump, not Paltzik, not the sheriff's office, has made that connection on the record. If you've seen that theory online, that's exactly where it lives right now. Theory, nothing more. 3 confirmed facts. 3 named claims, each sourced to a specific person or outlet. 1 theory that nobody official has put their name behind. That's the entire case, stripped down to what it actually is right now, not what it feels like after 2 months of headlines. And it's that gap between confirmed and claimed that a grand jury is about to have to sit with. We don't know yet. Here is what would tell us. Everything we've covered in this video comes down to that one sentence. So let's end where every honest update on this case has to end. Not with an answer, but with exactly what's still pending and exactly who's responsible for producing it. The state autopsy and toxicology findings. Owner: the Jackson County District Attorney's Office, currently preparing that evidence, along with everything else law enforcement has gathered, for presentation to a grand jury. The joint forensic examination of Nolan Wells's phone. Owner: disputed. The family has said they're ready for a joint exam involving experts from both sides, with possible FBI involvement. The DA's office has sought possession of the device instead. As of this reporting, no completed forensic extraction has been publicly released, and no agreement on how that exam happens has been reached. Corroboration of the claimed 5:50 p.m. sightings. Owner: the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. Attorney Edward Paltzik has said the information has been provided to authorities. The Sheriff's Office has not issued any public confirmation of those witnesses or their account. And one more item, separate from everything else in this case, that we're not going to unpack today. Attorneys for Warren Hudson, Jack Spatalo, and Morgan Seymour have sent a pre-suit defamation demand letter to Reverend Al Sharpton, giving him a 10-day window to respond before they say litigation becomes necessary. Sharpton has publicly said he welcomes it. That's a real on-record development, and it's moving on its own legal clock, separate from the grand jury, separate from the phone, separate from everything else pending here. We're flagging it now because it's part of this case. We're not resolving it now because it hasn't resolved itself yet either. So here's the final question, and it's the same one holding this entire case together. If two more people are now saying, through an attorney, that they saw Nolan Wells alive at 5:50 p.m., a full 80 minutes after a GPS record says his friend's boat was already gone, who actually verifies that? Does the sheriff's office name them? Does their account make it into what a grand jury is shown? And if it does it change anything about what that grand jury decides? We don't have that answer today. Nobody does. Not the family, not the attorneys, not the DA's office bound from speaking before that grand jury convenes. What we have is a case that keeps adding named sources, named claims, and named unresolved questions without adding a single resolved one. That's where this stands, right now, as of this reporting. I just want to know what happened to my son. We opened this case with a contradiction. A boat that left at 4:31 and two people who say they saw Nolan Wells alive long after it did. We're going to close on that same unresolved space because that's honestly where this case still lives. Somewhere in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, Christine and Elmore Wansley are still waiting, not for a video to be rewatched or a timeline to be re-argued online, but for someone, the sheriff's office, the DA's office, a grand jury none of us will ever see inside, to tell them plainly what happened to their son. Nolan Wells was 18, a freshman wide receiver who just started building a life at Southwest Mississippi Community College. He went to a barrier island for the 4th of July with people he'd known most of his life, and 2 days later, a park ranger found him on that same shoreline. Nearly 2 months on, the questions haven't shrunk. They've multiplied. A departure time everyone agreed on has a second timeline standing next to it now. A video with a disputed voice still doesn't have an official answer. A phone that might hold real answers still hasn't been through an agreed-upon exam. And a family is planning around a grand jury date they don't control, for a case that keeps growing instead of closing. That's not a satisfying place to end a video. It's not supposed to be. It's the actual current shape of this case, and pretending otherwise, just to give you a clean ending, would be its own kind of dishonesty. So we're not going to do that. We're going to leave you exactly where the Wansley family is, holding a GPS timestamp in one hand, an attorney's claim in the other, and no way yet to know which one tells the fuller story, or whether either one does. Somewhere between 4:31 and 5:50 that afternoon, something happened to Nolan Wells that still doesn't have a name. Not an accident, confirmed. Not something else, confirmed. Just undetermined, the same word both autopsies keep landing on, months apart, from two different doctors who don't agree on much else. A mother is still asking one question. As of tonight, nobody, not the friends, not the attorneys, not the state of Mississippi, has been able to fully answer it. We'll be back when that changes.